Hello, and thank you for joining us this morning as we discuss sustainable river recreation management, the benefits, steps, and funding. My name is Faye Augustin, and for those of you I haven't met before, I'm the Associate Director for Colorado River Basin Programs with American Rivers. I'm pleased to be a part of this conversation with you today. I work within American Rivers' Colorado River Basin Program, and over the last year, as a part of my work with American Rivers, and with the help of internal and external colleagues, we developed 2 reports on the importance of sustainable river recreation management that we'll discuss today. I'm excited that all of you are joining us on our August Blue Trails Guide webinar series. We've had a couple months off from our webinar series, so it's great to be back at the end of the summer to discuss important river-related issues today. A few quick housekeeping items before we dive into the meat of the conversation. As always, if you lose your connection, please log back into the webinar with your unique web link and passcode that was shared in your email. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available after the webinar. Please feel free to share the recorded webinar with colleagues who will find this information helpful. It should be available at the beginning of September for viewing. I'll send out an email as well as it will be available in our upcoming Blue Trails Guide e-newsletter. If you have any questions about the presentation or would like to get a hold of me, my contact information is on the screen at the bottom. Additionally, as always, at the conclusion of the presentation, I'll facilitate a brief question and answer session with all of you. I encourage you to submit a question at any time via the questions box on your screen, and they'll be answered during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. You're also welcome to wait until the end to ask your question again in the question box on the side panel of your GoToWebinar screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar, and what is not answered will be available in a transcribed form on our blog at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. One other thing to note, the 2 reports that we'll be discussing today are available on the Blue Trails Guide website at bluetrailsguide.org, as well as on our blog at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. I encourage you to review both of these reports. One overviews the specific steps as it relates to river recreation management. And then the other one is a deeper dive into a case study of how the Verde Valley in north central Arizona can utilize best management practices to further connect and preserve the Verde River throughout the Verde Valley. The goal of our presentation today is to give a brief overview of the 2 reports that we released this past year around sustainable river recreation management. I think as all of us are aware, river recreation management plans help to enhance recreational opportunities and protect a river's natural, social, and economic values. When communities work together to develop and implement a comprehensive river recreation plan, the river and communities along it will thrive. This presentation provides a brief overview of the framework that you can use to develop an effective community-driven river recreation management plan. While the plan is not the same recipe for every community, and every community is different, and the process will be different, this presentation will provide key components to help ensure success for your community, your users' experience, as well as the protection of your local river. We plan to cover 3 main things in this presentation. First is to give a brief background on river recreation management and why it's important. Second, I'll highlight some key steps for creating a river recreation management plan. As a part of this, I'll also cover best management practices and ways to frame recreation and river conservation within your plan. Finally, I'll outline different opportunities for funding these types of planning projects and types of river recreation best practices. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll leave a bit of time at the end for questions and answers. So why river recreation management? There's little doubt that the enjoyment of our natural resources are valuable. However, there are challenges with recreation, such as overcrowding, pollution, and resource degradation that arise when outdoor recreation is not properly managed. Not only does it put the river at risk, but users may also experience dangerous situations if river health and recreational amenities are not managed properly. There's also the potential for conflicts between different types of user groups that could pose unique challenges to the management approach. And while rivers are resilient, like any natural resource, there is a tipping point. River recreation management plans help to strike a balance between encouraging recreation and protecting our community's most valuable natural resource. A framework for designing recreational improvements and management has emerged from a collaboration with public land management agencies and many local jurisdictions. This framework is commonly referred to as the 3 E's and are ways to consider developing and implementing best management practices around recreation amenity design and management. And that's guided by the 3 E's: engineering, education, and enforcement. We'll cover these 3 ideas in more detail later in the presentation. The development of management plans provide the opportunity for your community to collaborate and have the necessary conversations to make decisions needed to manage an important recreational and natural resource in your backyard. The goal of this presentation, as I mentioned earlier, is to really kind of highlight a framework for you, for your community, local governments, planners, nonprofits, and others, to develop an effective river recreation management plan that has strong community support. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this plan is not the same. This process is not the same for every community. But this presentation will provide resources and a few case studies that shine a spotlight on ways to navigate the recreation management process and develop and implement a successful recreation plan in your community. You can see on the screen at this point the following steps that we've utilized to help create recreation management plans. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into each of these steps as we move throughout the presentation. So the first step in creating a recreation management plan is to gather information. Not just information about the river itself or just about the community, but about the two combined. This ensures that your plan recognizes and supports the benefits of recreation, along with the protection and restoration of the natural and cultural values of your river and your community. Important information to compile might include river conditions, existing recreation and natural resource plans, usage patterns, as well as other community considerations. Secondly, is to create a working group. A core working group is often a group of individuals who will shepherd the plan from the beginning to the end. This group is meant to be small from the onset, so think less is more, but collaborates with the larger stakeholder advisory committee as the process develops. This core working group helps to keep participants focused and keep the plan on track. As I mentioned earlier, understanding river conditions will help to lay a strong foundation for your planning process and eventual river recreation management plans. Understanding community recreation and legal considerations are all super important, as they all play a role in the way that your river is perceived and managed already within your community. So take time to understand where things are, maybe not just with your normal stakeholder groups, but consider private landowners, other land management agencies that also might have some existing plans and existing perspectives on how the river is managed and utilized. Step 2, solicit input and build community support. The success of your river recreation management plan largely depends on community support and involvement. As with every planning process, and really with most river issues, we need engaged partners, stakeholders, and community members. To develop a plan that enjoys broad support, there must be early and extensive outreach. The community should be involved in every stage of the process, from planning to implementation and all the way to monitoring and funding. There's a number of ways to engage the public, which include public meetings, through the web and comments, issues workshops, as well as direct outreach. One really great example of how a local community to me here in Colorado is the city of Durango. A few years ago, the City of Durango, in coordination with the National Park Service's Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, led a collaborative process to create a river recreation management plan for the Animas River. Durango engaged the public in the process really extensively, giving residents an opportunity to clearly articulate issues and concerns to ensure collaborative solutions that addressed the concerns of all river users. They utilized a number of public engagement strategies, including a survey, community open houses, and workshops that focused on specific river issues. By the end of the process, each of the participants had developed a set of recommendations for management that were eventually pulled into the plan itself. So this is just one example of a community that has really utilized and capitalized on engaging and finding community support. The last thing to consider in this second step is creating an advisory committee. So this is the larger group that I mentioned earlier that works closely with the core working group. So a River Recreation Stakeholder Advisory Committee is a larger team that includes the core working group that will determine how the management plan will be developed, monitored, funded, and eventually implemented. It's important that your advisory team is made up of diverse stakeholders that represent both existing and potentially new users. Together, the committee will identify common goals, convene dialogues about differences, and identify paths forward for managing the river. Once the advisory team and committee is formed, you can start to identify goals, common goals and interests from different user groups that will encourage positive user experience and sustainable management. So before we dive into the third step, I want to take a step back for a moment and talk a little bit about how we can frame the approach for sustainable river recreation management and what are some broader concepts to consider as you start to move forward with a management plan in your community. There's a number of things to consider prior to developing the recreation management plan and priorities that often kind of come after you've already created your core working group and your advisory committee, because it's really important, again, to have community buy-in and support around some of these issues. So the biggest thing to consider prior to starting the actual development of your plan is considering recreational capacity. So rec capacity is the maximum amount of use and impacts that can be accommodated by an area without unacceptable change to resource and user experience. So capacity varies depending on the size of the site and on the type of recreation that will happen at a site. For example, if you're thinking about something like motorized boats, that will affect a river differently than walking alongside the river, having a path, or just having non-motorized boats. So it's really important to think about the type of experience you want, the type of experience and the type of uses that will occur at each recreation site. In addition to capacity, it's important to consider also the amount and type of development you want at each access point or within the overall recreation area. The U.S. Forest Service developed the Recreation Opportunity Spectrum, or the ROS standards, that help to understand the different classifications of intensity and use at recreation sites. So this really is as broad as you can think. From really primitive, think about wilderness, very few people, only really having the river or the area to yourself, all the way through to motorized, non-motorized use, rural use as well, all the way into urban use. So prior to establishing a management practice, it's really important to think about the type of experience that you and your stakeholder group want people to have as they visit and they experience your river. Once the capacity of a recreational site, including the appropriate level of development, has been established, then it's time to develop and design the site for maximum user experience while also protecting important resource values. Step 3, putting the pen to paper, creating your river recreation management plan. So as we've talked about before, these plans seek to ensure that the user experience is managed in a way that protects the values of the river as well as the recreational experience. So as I've mentioned earlier, this includes considering carrying capacity or recreational capacity, as well as the type of development you want to occur within the overall river corridor or at each of the individual sites that you're managing. As I've said many times now, this is not a one-size-fits-all process, and each community and really each access point should be considered individually based on the ecological features of your site, and then also the types of experiences that will occur within each access point or within the overall river corridor. So the first step in creating your plan is to create a vision. So this vision statement is really important and helps to define the long-term goals of your management plan and creates a shared sense of ownership and commitment from the community at large. The vision should be informed by the steering committee as well as the general public. Your vision statement is aspirational. Think long-term here. What do you want your river to look like or to feel like in 10, 15, 20 years? It serves as a guide for choosing today's actions as well as actions into the future. Next, we identify areas of emphasis. So these areas of emphasis are the key ideas or topics on which your community wants to focus within the river recreation management plan. So this might include the broad topics, right? So think big picture here: recreation, community education, conservation, wildlife. And then underneath each of these areas of emphasis, think about specific goals. How can your goals and then the following objectives ensure that your areas of emphasis are protected, are preserved for the future? When identifying your areas of emphasis, it's really important to take into consideration the feedback that you heard throughout your process of soliciting public support. The next step, once you have your areas of emphasis and you're starting to consider your goals and your objectives for each of these different areas, is to consider the 3 E's: engineering, education, and enforcement. How you can utilize best practices under these 3 ideas to ensure your areas of emphasis are protected. The 3 E's will help to establish goals for each of the areas and help to ensure that they're met. We'll go into a little bit more detail about each of the 3 E's momentarily. Finally, the last 2 pieces are to actually write the plan, develop it, utilize the stakeholder group to put your pen to paper and to make the ideas into a set of action plans. The last piece is to update your plan as needed. Most river recreation plans, as well as overall management plans, are reviewed and updated as needed, which happens to be about every 5 to 10 years, which allows managing entities to address issues or make changes to ensure the protection of the natural resource as well as the user experience. So the next 3 slides are going to go into a little bit more information about this idea of framing and covering the 3 E's that I've mentioned a couple times already today: engineering, education, and enforcement. So the first thing that I'm going to mention briefly is engineering, which is the thoughtful design of river access, signage, and other recreational amenities, development, and infrastructure. The intentional design of a river recreation site encourages ethical and responsible river use and promotes self-regulation of crowds and recreational behavior in a desired pattern. There's a number of ways to design a site that promotes capacity management. So the first thing is to consider, again, the design and planning. So from the amount and type of facilities to the consideration of solar power and water reuse. Additionally, engineering is a design of transportation and parking lots. This includes using transportation as a way to manage visitation and involves the strategic development of roads, trails, and paths that provide access to recreational resources, and the parking that may be available or potentially unavailable at those sites. One of the coolest examples that I've heard of as it relates to engineering is Sweetwater Creek State Park, which is located just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. It's home to a small creek with endless opportunities to hike, fish, and canoeing, and is also home to one of the most energy-efficient visitor centers in Georgia. So Sweetwater Creek State Park designed its visitor center to reduce its energy and water footprint. It's powered by solar panels and plumbed with a compostable toilet system. The solar array atop multiple roofs within the park and on the visitor center and provides 20% of the visitors' energy needs. And the overall energy consumption is 51% less than comparable buildings. So it's pretty cool. In addition, the compostable toilets and then the rainwater harvesting system that the visitor center has reduces water consumption in Georgia for this particular state park by 77%. The other thing that's really neat is that the state park has included a number of educational opportunities for people who are visiting the park to understand how and why they've created these different energy and water efficient strategies at their visitor center. The second E is education. And education refers to the element of recreational planning that's focused on providing public information and awareness. So this could include education around safe recreation practices, sustainable river use, as well as sharing knowledge of important historical, archaeological, wildlife, and other natural resources. So examples would include the amount of time it takes to boat between two access points, the equipment and supplies needed for a safe experience, and etiquette around trespassing and river behavior. These types of educational efforts are most effective. So think here about signage, about brochures, about websites, when there's a number of different ways to reach the public. So think not just one, but how can you include many opportunities for education? There's a number of ways to educate, including traditional signage, interactive websites, social media. Being creative is essential to reach new audiences. And then the last best E, or the last E practice that I'll discuss is enforcement. Enforcement ensures that those recreating on and alongside the river are held accountable for their recreation activities. It helps to manage trespassing and disturbances to property, prevents the dumping of litter and trash, and monitors other law enforcement challenges. Enforcement also limits capacity and restricts illegal, inadvisable, or unsafe behaviors at various parks and within the river corridor. It's really critical as you start to think about recreation management and enforcement to coordinate between various law personnel, between park rangers, and emergency management representatives. Effective collaboration can establish a common understanding of goals and appropriate activities. It also improves communication, identifies issues, and catalyzes collective actions to handle agreed upon issues. It's really important that emergency management planning happens early within the management process, because that helps to understand and helps people to have a clear sense of which entities carry which responsibility for public health and safety. Here in Colorado, we've had some really excellent opportunities where enforcement has led to a decrease in the number of, in the way that police officers have had to be involved. In Golden, Colorado, along Clear Creek, they have hired a river ranger who helps to give citations, which for people who are not utilizing the river corridor properly or are breaking various rules that the city has identified, which has reduced significantly the amount of police involvement. So helping to kind of better utilize the city police time. Additionally, there is Trail Watch in Minneapolis, which is a volunteer-run organization that regulates safety and enforces rules to better steward shared public resources. So Trail Watch doesn't actually intervene in incidences, but reports suspicious activity to local law enforcement agencies. So they're sort of just there to make sure that everyone is okay. So step 4 is to implement your plan for monitoring and adapt your management plan. Monitoring plays a really important role in the protection and stewardship of your river. Monitoring is observing or measuring selected features in order to assess the health, gauge the ability of the ecosystem to support human uses, and detect early warning of change. There's really 2 main reasons why monitoring is important. First is to ensure that your plan is being implemented and that and the various actions that you've set out to achieve are successfully implemented. Secondly, is to determine if the actions are helping to achieve the overall goal for each area of emphasis. So a couple of quick ideas around best practices for sustainable recreation, for monitoring sustainable recreation management would be when evaluating the data for management plans, recreation managers should compare the individual monitoring results against the identified benchmarks and outcomes for goals and metrics of each management practice. So let's say you have a specific emphasis as recreation, and one of the things that you want to see is equal use between two types of recreation. As a part of the monitoring for that specific area of emphasis, you can have volunteers or people within your organization go out and actually count and monitor the number of uses and the types of uses that are happening at a specific recreation area. And monitoring should happen early and often and should be really a very specific part of your management plan. And then finally, the last step, and arguably one of the most important, is how to fund your plan. Funding river recreation management is really challenging. I think we all are aware of that as it relates to funding in general. Unfortunately, traditional funding sources are not always interested in supporting planning and recreation management. Generally speaking, it's easier to fund projects where you're breaking ground and cutting ribbons and where there's clear and measurable changes that the community can really see. And these are often capital projects in which specific physical challenges to the landscape are involved. Management is also challenging to fund because it's invisible to the user and the funder. So you need to kind of think about it and frame it as a sustained need that stretches beyond just one specific time frame, and really kind of incorporate unique types of funding opportunities. So on your screen, you'll see a number of different ways that you can think about funding recreation management. One of the most fun ways that I've seen specific access points managed and funded is through a lottery or a raffle. So there is an organization in Georgia that has raffled off the names of different bathrooms, and that's been a really cool way to help raise money for the management of that specific site. And then that access point or that specific bathroom is called whatever different name the winner of the raffle decided on. And there's a lot more information about funding plans within both of our reports. So again, I encourage you to check out those reports that are available at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. So we've just got a couple of moments here, being mindful of time, to answer a few questions. So if you haven't already asked your question in the question box, please feel free to ask your question now. One quick note before we move into the questions is that river recreation management is clearly really important and is often a challenge to undertake. However, I'm hopeful that the steps and the best practices that were described in this presentation and in our two reports, as well as the examples given, will help you and your community to determine the best way to move forward. So we've got quite a few questions here, so I'll try to answer as many as possible in the next couple of minutes. So one of the questions that I have that has come up is, what is the biggest mistake you see people making when creating a recreation management plan? And so I think one of the biggest mistakes is not thinking or including important stakeholders. And so as many of us know, when we're thinking about groups that we want to engage and that we think about as it relates to rivers, we usually go to the same groups over and over again. However, rivers impact everyone. So when you start to think about your management plan, think broadly, think outside the box. Who might you be able to engage? Is it the local school? Is it a teacher? Is it a landowner that have a connection with the river that you might not think about? Engage them early so that they have a sense of stewardship and a buy-in to the plan that you're putting together. This is kind of a funny question, is about the bathrooms in Georgia. They have lots of different names. Some of them are pretty funny, have been named after past presidents. Some of them have more kind of official names. They might be the name of a business or an organization. So it sort of depends. It's a really fun way to engage all sorts of different members of your community. And then I've got a number of questions here about where you can find specific information about more of the steps or about the 3 E's. So all of that information can be found within our 2 reports that, again, are available at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. The one is called Best Practices for Managing Sustainable Recreation in the Verde Valley, and that one really provides a significant amount of information about the 3 E's. The second one is Steps for Managing Recreation, River Recreation Management, and that report covers more of the step-by-step process that we discussed today. So it covers step 1, step 2, step 3, and kind of dives a lot deeper into the different concepts that were discussed during this presentation. There are also a number of resources, a lot of resources in the back of each of those reports that kind of tell you more, have more specific examples about what other communities have done, as well as kind of where you can better and how you can think a little bit more about capacity and engaging your community, the different aspects of the report. So it is 11:30, so I am, to be mindful of everyone's time, going to kind of end the Q&A session at this time. However, as I mentioned earlier, we will have a transcript of all questions and answers available at the end of once the webinar is recorded and available, and that will be available just after around Labor Day, so September 1st or 2nd. And I will send out emails to everyone as we move forward. And again, if you have any follow-up questions or want to talk further, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is available on the screen. I really have appreciated everyone's participation and the number of questions that were asked during the webinar today. I'll be sure to get all of those answered and available on our blog at bluetrailsguide.org/blog. Please also check out our reports. And thank you guys so much for participating in our August webinar, and we look forward to seeing you back in September. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye.